What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and we got our first college football playoff rankings last night. Now I'm going to give you my updated college football playoff predictions, and now knowing those rankings. And honestly, there was no... If you followed this channel, everything is gone as far as the playoff picture has gone pretty much like I've said it would go based on the results on the field. I don't think there was any surprise. You know, some people were saying, for example, that Texas A&M wouldn't be ranked that high. Texas A&M is going to need a lot of help, and I told you Texas A&M doesn't need that much help. That's why I had them preseason in my playoff, because I could see them potentially losing to Alabama, winning out, and getting into the college football playoff. So again, there was no real surprise for me. Some people thought BYU was going to be ranked a lot higher. I had them projected outside of the top 10 just like they were. And so my playoff predictions really haven't changed a whole lot based off of those rankings from last night. You're going to see maybe a few tweaks here, but if you've been following this along each week, you're going to see it's not really much different. I still have Alabama at number 1. I think they will be the number 1 seed. I think they're going to win out. And this is different from the playoff picture when we do the playoff eliminator video, because this is my actual prediction. This is based on what I think is going to happen the rest of the season, not based on what should happen, what the odds are. So Alabama, I think, is going to win out. I think they're going to beat Auburn. I think they're going to win the SEC championship game against Florida, take the number 1 seed. And then one flip here is number 2 and number 3. So now Clemson appears to me like they're going to be the number 2 seed. If they beat Notre Dame, I'm predicting that they will beat Notre Dame. And so I've got the Tigers as the number 2 seed. And I just don't see, you look at what's ahead of them and you look at Ohio State. If these two teams win out, I don't really see any way that Ohio State's going to pass Clemson, because the schedule the rest of the way, it's not really tough for either team. And then you go to the conference championship games. Clemson's going to be playing more than likely a top 2 team in Notre Dame. Ohio State will be playing Northwestern, who is going to be outside of the top 4. So I don't see any way Ohio State's going to pass Clemson unless Ohio State is just really impressive in their games and Clemson is barely winning games. Maybe we could see something like that. But it doesn't really matter, because 2 and 3 are going to play each other, and Clemson will play Ohio State whether they're this way or the other way. If Clemson is 3 and Ohio State is number 2, it's still going to be the same matchup, and it's still going to be at the Rose Bowl, so it really doesn't matter. But just for the sake of ranking these teams, I do believe Clemson will be number 2, and I've got Notre Dame at number 4. I do have them losing to Clemson, but we're talking about number 2 versus number 3. And if the number 2 team loses in a close game, are they really going to fall that much? I don't think so. I think Notre Dame... With Notre Dame at 2 and Clemson at 3, I think that really gives Notre Dame a good shot to stay in the top 4 if they lose that game, if it's close. Now, if they get blown out, I think the committee's probably going to put another team in here. But if that game is close, and I think it'll be close, Notre Dame's a really good football team. I think Notre Dame will be number 4. But I kind of think that it's possible that Notre Dame's going to lose to North Carolina on Friday. I'm not predicting it. As you can see, I'm predicting Notre Dame to win that game and then lose to Clemson. But it wouldn't shock me if Notre Dame does get upset by North Carolina. That's going to be a really good game, I think. So that's something to keep in mind. And if that does happen, if North Carolina beats Notre Dame, or if Notre Dame gets blown out by Clemson, or if Notre Dame beats Clemson, that's going to open the door. And we'll talk about the teams that I think have the best shot to get that number 4 spot in just a second. But let's go through my predictions first. I have Alabama beating Notre Dame, no change there. And then I have Ohio State beating Clemson, no change there. That's what I've been predicting the last few weeks. Clemson, I believe, deserves to be ranked ahead of Ohio State, because Ohio State just doesn't really have the resume. But that doesn't mean I think Clemson would win that game in a head-to-head matchup. I think Ohio State has the potential to be a little bit better than Clemson. They're not playing that great right now, but we're talking about several weeks from now, over a month from now, before these teams will actually play. I think Ohio State's going to put it all together. I think they're going to continue to improve. And I think the Buckeyes will win that game. They're going to be, really motivated. They had all off season to talk about Clemson and how Clemson beat them. And I just think Ohio State, it's going to go their way. This is an offense. It's going to be a shootout. This is an offense, though, that I think is going to be able to put it together. And I don't know. Justin Fields didn't look great against Indiana in a big game. He wasn't great against Clemson last year in a big game. Trevor Lawrence has played really well in big games. So I'm definitely torn here. I could definitely see Clemson winning this game. I'm really back and forth. I want to see, I guess, what these teams look like the next couple of weeks. But I do have Alabama beating Ohio State. This is the most complete team in college football right now. They can throw it. They can run it. And their defense is now playing at a level where we haven't seen in a while. This is kind of the old school Alabama defense where they are just dominating games. They're getting defensive touchdowns. It's just the best. This is the best team in college football, and I think they will prove it. They will beat Ohio State, and the Crimson Tide, as much as I hate to say it, will win the national championship this year. Plus, I talk about this in the past, with all the funny things going on, all the distractions and everything. Which head coach do you trust to take a team through all of those challenges? It's Nick Saban, and I think that's another reason why Alabama will win the national championship this year. All right, so we go to the top contenders for number 4. If something does happen, if Notre Dame gets blown out, if Notre Dame beats Clemson, if Notre Dame loses to North Carolina, there are ways where this could happen. If Alabama is upset somehow, there are potential paths for another team to get in. And this is the order of teams that I think is most likely to get in, and it's really based off of what the rankings look like. We got the rankings last night, and it actually hasn't changed. If you've been watching my videos, and I put the top contenders for number 4, it really has not changed. Texas A&M is still the next team to get in. You can talk about Cincinnati and say, well, if Cincinnati wins out, they're going to have a conference championship game. They're going to be a conference champion. Texas A&M, they're not going to put them against Alabama. Well, first of all, the committee does not match the teams up. The 4 playoff teams, they are not matched up. They are simply ranked by who they think is the best. They put out their rankings. They match up games in the New Year's Six, but that's different. They don't just match up the playoff games. They simply rank the teams, and it comes out 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3. So yeah, I understand you don't want to see Texas A&M Alabama again because of A&M getting blown out the first time, but A&M's a lot better now, and I think the game would be more competitive. But there's no way you're going to – how are you going to justify putting Cincinnati in over Texas A&M when A&M is ahead of them right now? And you look at A&M, they've still got Auburn on the schedule. They've got Ole Miss. They've got LSU. Compared to what Cincinnati has, they've got Tulsa coming up. They'll have an ACC or an AAC championship game. There's just not going to be anything for Cincinnati to pass Texas A&M unless they're really dominant and Texas A&M is struggles and they barely win against LSU and Ole Miss, something like that. Cincinnati has no top 25 wins right now. You look at their schedule, you look at where the committee has ranked teams, they don't have a top 25 win. Tulsa, if they beat them, will fall out of the top 25, so they're still not going to have one. With SMU not being ranked, there's really nothing there for Cincinnati, and I just don't see any way that Cincinnati is going to pass Texas A&M unless, again, Cincinnati blows teams out and Texas A&M barely wins. But what if Texas A&M loses? They could lose to Auburn. They could lose to LSU. Then that's how Cincinnati gets into the college football playoff. What about Florida? Well, if they beat Alabama, they're in. I just don't think they're going to do that, and that's why I have them behind Texas A&M and Cincinnati, just because I think it's less likely that they upset Alabama than it is that A&M or Cincinnati gets the help that they need. There's Northwestern. I don't really see them beating Ohio State. I guess it could happen, but I've got them at number 4. Again, they have a better chance than these teams behind them: Oregon, USC, Miami. For Oregon, USC, they gotta win out, and they gotta be impressive. And based off of where they're ranked right now, I don't think there's going to be anything that is going to push them up into the top 4 unless we get a lot of upsets, or unless one of these teams really just turns it on and starts blowing teams out by 30, 40 points every game. It's very unlikely that a Pac-12 team gets in this year. Miami is going to need some help. They need Clemson to lose a game somehow, and then Miami can get into the ACC championship. That's probably their only path. I don't really see a way for them to get in because they're not ranked as high as A&M, so I don't think they could get in with the same way A&M could. A&M's got a signature win over Florida. Miami's not going to have a signature win on the resume. There's nothing left on the schedule. And then if it really, we get a ton of chaos, there's Texas and Oklahoma. If one of these teams wins the Big 12 with 2 losses, I don't think it'll be enough to pass an undefeated Oregon or USC or even a 1-loss Miami, but if Miami loses another game, Oregon or USC loses another game, that opens the door for Texas or Oklahoma again if everything else happens to go their way. A&M loses another game, Cincinnati loses a game, Florida loses, Notre Dame beats Clemson. There is a path. It's a tiny path, but there is a path for maybe Texas or Oklahoma to sneak in there, but it would take complete chaos, and based off of what's happened in the last few weeks, I don't see it happening. But that's my updated playoff prediction, and just the teams that I think have the most likely path to get in. I would love to know what you guys think about it. What are your predictions for the college football playoff? Do you think we're going to see a big upset down the stretch? It's going to shake things out potentially. Again, give me your thoughts down below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.